All right, hello and welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Southwest Ohio Native Plantings. Let me know if you're having any trouble hearing me or if you're not able to see the presentation. We have a chat function that I'm checking, so if you have any questions or any needs throughout, just throw it in there and I will see it. I am paying attention. So to start off, why should you plant native plants? One of the main reasons, it provides wildlife habitat. So we have something that we call wildlife corridors. So as migratory birds or insects like our monarch butterfly here are moving along their path, if there's too much space in between those little pockets of habitat, they can't really get very far. So think of it like, you make a pit stop at a gas station when you're on a road trip. Think of creating a little pocket of habitat like creating a little rest stop for some migratory animals. And it also creates habitat for our local animals that stick around all year round. They also need a place to be able to move through and live and have a safe space. It promotes healthier soil and water. So our soil, especially here in Claremont County specifically, is a very unique. And by planting plants that are native to this region of Ohio, to this soil, they will actually help keep your soil healthier. If you have any ponds or creeks or any sort of water feature on your lands, putting native plants around that will help to filter out a lot of the water, a lot of the groundwater that's coming down into those bodies of water, and will help keep your water cleaner and fresher and healthier. Over time, and the important part here is long term, it will require less work and less monetary input. Because these plants are specially adapted to live here in this climate, in this, super cold in the winter, really hot in the summer, very dry August, very wet springs. Our native plants love that climate. They are very used to that. That is what they are adapted for. So when you do have, we haven't had rain in 2 months, you don't have to go out and start watering your native plants once they are established. And I'll show you why in a minute. But over time, once they're established, they are good to go, and you can kind of just let them be. You don't really have to do a lot to them. Another fun benefit of putting plants, especially native plants, around your water features, especially around like ponds and lakes, helps prevent geese. So geese like to nest where there is low grass, where they can kind of see everywhere around them. If you have nice tall grasses, nice tall native plants, you're less likely to have geese nesting in those spots, which is why usually you'll see geese nesting in those like big industrial parks, because that they have that grass line that's mowed right to the edge of the pond, and it creates the perfect little spot for them to nest. There we go. So why don't you have to water your plants in the really dry times? Because these are their root systems. So these are of prairie plants. These are more of like plains kind of habitat, but it has a similar, some of these are ones that we do have here in Ohio, and it has a similar effect. So over here in the left side, you have turf grass, and that's its root system. So turf grass, the root system grows as deep as the grass is tall. So a lot of times you have roots right here. So if there's not water right there, it's not getting any water. The water table is lower than, an inch below, an inch to 2 inches below the surface of the soil. Your grass is going to get dry. However, if you have our coneflower here, these are 5-foot deep root systems. If you've got switchgrass, that's an 11-foot deep root system. This compass plant is all the way down to 15 feet. So is this lead plant, all the way 15 feet down into the water table, so they are, I mean, even when it is dry as a bone, we have not gotten rain in a couple of months. Their roots are in the water table. They're like, drought? What drought? My roots are fine. I'm getting all the water I need. They also do help to keep your soil healthier because if you look at how dense these root systems are, they are interlocking. They are really holding your soil in place, and they are helping to aerate your soil to make sure that there's oxygen and nutrients moving throughout your soil, that your soil is not super packed together. Like I said, here we have a lot of clay in our soil, and if you know anything about clay, it has tiny, tiny particles, and it likes to stick together. It's like Play-Doh. So having anything to kind of break that up is really good for your soils. Some terminology that you'll hear throughout this. So we're going to talk about native and non-native plants. So a native plant is a plant that is historically found growing in this region. And by historically, I mean several hundred to several thousand years or beyond. And then non-native is just a plant that is not traditionally found or historically found growing in this region. Non-native does not necessarily mean invasive. So like geraniums aren't native, but they're not overstepping their boundaries. They are not invasive. Same thing with like Japanese maples or begonias or tomatoes. Tomatoes are not native, but they're not an invasive plant. That brings us to aggressive versus invasive. An aggressive plant is a native plant that grows aggressively, that is very competitive, and that has a lot of tricks to kind of help it to succeed. Pictured here is bottlebrush buckeye. It's one of my favorite native plants, but it is definitely an aggressive plant. So those are plants that, if you pay attention, you're either going to need to plant them where you don't mind if they take over. If you're like, sure, fill that side of the house, sounds great. Or to plant them with something that will compete with them and kind of keep them in check, or plant them somewhere where they're not completely happy, where they have a little bit of limitation as far as being able to fully thrive. An invasive plant is a non-native plant that is overstepping and outcompeting our native plants. So we've got bush honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, privet, lesser celandine is a big one right now. All of the, calorie pear, those are classified as invasive plants because they are not native to this region and they escape their plantings. They go outside of where they were, placed, and they outcompete our native plants. So then they get that invasive little tag on them. Invasive plants are, when they are officially classified as invasive by the state, you then cannot purchase them in nurseries. There are some plants that are invasive that are not classified as invasive, so you do have to do a little bit of research when you're looking at an aggressive non-native plant. But just look into it, do a little bit of research. We've got cultivars and nativars. So a cultivar is a cultivated strain of a plant. So I like to think of it kind of like dog breeds. You've got a dog that's bred to be short and long, so it can, get into gopher holes, or you've got a dog that's bred to be big and stocky and fluffy, so they can, be working out in the cold temperatures. Same thing with plants. We'll breed them for certain features. So you might have, think of like tomatoes. You've got tomatoes that are bred to be beefsteak tomatoes. They're big and huge. And then other tomatoes are cultivated to be sweeter or tangier, or so that's just a cultivar of a plant. If you think about like tomatoes and you go to the store, or if you think about like, let's say apples, you'll see like the Fuji apples or Gala apples. Those are cultivars, and they have that little name on them. A nativar is just the kind of nickname for a cultivar of a native plant. And again, they will have a little like nickname at the beginning of them. Bee Balm or Monarda has a lot of very fun cultivar names. There's like a Bee Happy, Bee Well. So those are cultivars of that plant. They've just been cultivated for specific traits. So if you're planting native plants to do specifically like habitat improvement and you want to provide habitat for wildlife, pay attention to like, oh, is this one, oh, this cultivar is cultivated to bloom longer. Okay, so it's going to have a longer food time. Sometimes they might be cultivated to have bigger blooms, but they end up producing less nectar, or you just got to like pay attention to what that cultivation has done and whether or not it fits your purposes. And then sun versus part sun versus shade. This is something with all plants. If you're familiar with planting at all, it's just what that plant likes as far as the amount of light. So sun, I believe it's 6 or more hours of sunlight per day. Part sun is 2 to 6 hours, and then, or 4 to 6 hours, I think, and then shade is less than that. So that's where your plant is going to thrive the best, that amount of light. You got to pay attention when you're thinking about what you're planting. Think about the amount of sun that spot gets. Where do you start? Because it seems like it's a big project. Questions to ask. First of all, what are your goals? Are you trying to improve your soil? Are you trying to help out a body of water? Are you just trying to look pretty? Are you trying to like make an ornamental garden that's also functional? Are you trying to make a rain garden? What are your goals with this planting? Think about what's your space. Are you doing, I'm going to redo my entire yard. Or are you like, I'm going to do this, little patch around my mailbox, or I've got a window box on my balcony that I want to do. Where, what's the amount of sun that it gets? What's the soil type? Do all of that research. You can get free soil test kits pretty easily. You can also, I believe that you can contact either OSU Extension or Claremont County Soil and Water Conservation District, or really any conservation district in your region, and they will help you out with that as well, with like soil testing. And think year round. Don't plant everything so that it'll bloom in May, and then July through September your garden looks bleh. Try to have something that's looking interesting throughout the season. Personally, I recommend to start small and build from that. So do a little bit, and then every other year, add on to that. You don't have to completely re-landscape all of your space at the very beginning. There are several different types of native gardens that you can create. You can do a pollinator garden, so all food and host plants that will support native pollinators. You can do a rain garden, so that looks something like this. This one down here, where it's got these lower, kind of has a divot. So if you have any part of your lawn that, or your area that has, tends to have like standing water, putting a rain garden there can be a good choice. Sponge gardens are just like a slightly different type of rain garden, where it's just a little different in how you construct it, but same purpose, to kind of help with like standing water, help with soil filtration. Or are you trying to do a food garden? Do you want to have plants that are going to produce food? We do have a lot of native plants that do produce edible components for you. I have some examples of some beautiful native gardens. So a lot of times you might get some criticism about native gardens where it's like, it looks messy. It just looks like you let everything go. Which, depending on on what your preference is, that can look really cool, depending on who you are. But this is a really cool native garden where you've got all the plants kind of interlocking and touching. I always argue for planting plants close together. Means less weeding. and you don't have to mulch. If you go out into the field, it's not covered in mulch in between all the plants. And when you go out into a native field, wildflower field, they're not, here's this plant and this plant and this plant. They're all interwoven and interconnected. They're all touching and getting to know each other and kind of helping each other out. This is a beautiful, if you have like a prairie or you want to create kind of this type of habitat, this is gorgeous and all native, absolutely beautiful. I love the purple and yellow combination of flowers. It's one of my absolute favorite color combos. This is another one, another native garden. Again, these are large scale things. So this is kind of, majorly aspirational, but another one you can play with color, you can play with the height. This is a good one for playing with that height where it's almost like waves and how they interact. And I like to show the difference between this one and this one, because this one you've got all the same, the plants are kind of in their own little patches, but they're all still connected. They're all still, very close together. This one you've got, little pockets of each plant throughout. So just different styles that you can do. You can make it look very manicured, and you can go for kind of a monochrome kind of look if you would like. Another one where they're kind of in, their own little patches in their own sections of plants, but still looking really pretty and really awesome. Another one playing with height where you've got tall and short and all kinds of different heights and things and colors going on. One thing that I recommend doing when you're planning out what you're going to plant is to create a bloom ladder. So this is all for plants out west. This is the closest example I could find. But as you're looking at species, make a spreadsheet and have, okay, this one blooms from March through May. And then this will bloom from April to July. Then I'll have this going until August. And looking and kind of planning that out so that you can fill that season with something that's either blooming or looking interesting. All right, let's jump into native plant recommendations. So we're going to start big and get little. To start out with trees, oaks, they're an always recommend. We have 11 species of oaks that are native to Ohio. So a lot of choices to choose from. They're very sturdy, they're long living trees. They are slow growing. So if you plant that oak, it might be a little while before you get the full payoff from that giant oak. But they are amazing for wildlife. They support so many bird species. They're really great for nesting. They also, oaks as a genus, all throughout over North America, studies have been done that have shown that they support over 900 species of caterpillars as a host plant. The host plant is just a plant that an insect will only lay their eggs on that plant. So it's like, so for monarch butterflies, milkweed is their host plant. They will only lay their eggs on that milkweed. So there are a lot of butterflies and moths and all kinds of things that will only lay their caterpillar eggs on oaks. And so when you have a lot of caterpillars, it also means you get a lot of birds because birds love to eat caterpillars. And so if you plant something that grows those walking granola bars for them, then you'll get the birds coming to eat them as well. One note with oaks, and with most trees in general, but especially with oaks, I do not recommend planting them near any structures. Oaks have a very strong root system. If you've ever walked through a city or a town where they planted oaks as street trees, the sidewalk does this because it's going over all of the oak roots that are now going underneath. So if you like the foundation of your home, don't plant an oak very close to it. Maples, another always recommend. So we have red, silver, and sugar maples that are all native to Ohio. Another great supporter of wildlife. They provide a lot of good nesting habitat. Their seeds are actually a food source for a lot of animals, especially like squirrels and chipmunks and animals like that. And you can make maple syrup from them in the springtime. Or well, in the late winter, I should say, not in the spring. Persimmons. So this is Diospyros virginiana. These are a kind of a medium to large tree, but they are a fruit-producing tree. They produce a fruit mid to late autumn, so usually about like August-ish. They can reach 50 feet if you put them in the full sun. So they can get pretty darn tall. They're adaptable to most soils, but they do prefer soil that doesn't stay wet. So these are not a great one for like a rain garden. They can be slow growing. So just a note with those. Eastern red cedar. This is our only native evergreen to Southwest Ohio. There are other evergreens that will grow here, but they are not historically found in this region or in this little area. Really important winter shelter and food source for birds. The little juniper berries are very good for birds in the wintertime. You'll get a lot of hangers around in the cold months. They do prefer to be in full sun. So they're a primary succession plant, which means that when there is any disturbance to an ecosystem, they're one of the first plants to come back. So that's why a lot of times you see them along like roadways, along the interstate. They like to be the first ones. They are a host plant. So for the juniper hairstreak and imperial moths, which are two very beautiful moths, they will almost exclusively lay their eggs on eastern red cedars. Flowering dogwood, if you want a cute little ornamental tree. Cornus florida is the native species of it. So it's the white one. You can get like native ours that'll be different colors, but like the straight species is always blooms white. They are very interesting. So the flowers are actually these little teeny green things in the very middle. The white petals are actually sepals, which is a modified leaf. So they've got, unusual flowers on them. They prefer full sun to part shade, and they do like very nutrient-rich soil. Eastern redbud, another ornamental tree. These guys are fast growing, so if you plant them, they'll do great. They are in the same family as honey locust, Kentucky coffee tree, black locust, so they're actually legumes, which means that they're really great for your soil because they are nitrogen fixers, so they put nutrients back into the soil, which is really great. So they actually will help out as a little extra with keeping your soil healthy. They're fast growing, but they do have a shorter lifespan. So after about 20 years, they do tend to like start to decline. So just to be aware of that, you may have to, plan on replacing them. But they have these beautiful early spring flowers. I've seen some recipes where you can actually make like a vinaigrette with the buds, and a few other things. So, there are a lot of interesting uses with our red buds. River birch, they are another fast growing tree. They can get up to 70 feet tall when they're in their optimal conditions. They're not always that, tiny, short little tree that you usually see like right by someone's house. They do like shade, and they are recommended as one of the most disease-free species of birch. So sometimes birches can be prone to diseases, but river birches tend to stay pretty healthy. Getting into shrubs, elderberry, it's a native member of the viburnum family here. It establishes very easily. You can propagate them where you take a stick and you like literally just a branch of an elderberry and you stick it in the ground and chances are it will be good. Fruits can be used in like pies, jellies, all kinds of things. So they are edible. Both the flowers and the fruits have been used in winemaking. So if you want to experiment a little bit or make different like tinctures and things, they do prefer like very moist soil, so great for a rain garden. And they do prefer to be like full sun to partial shade. They don't like to get to be in full shade. Spice bush, another really good shrub. They have a little fruit that they produce that's really good for scent. They kind of smell like allspice. So if you do any like scent sachets or simmer pots or anything like that, you can use their fruits for that. You can make a tea from their leaves and their twigs. In the fall, their leaves turn yellow. In the spring, they get these beautiful kind of yellow-green buds that are always, for me, one of the first like, oh, it's actually spring now indications. And they are pretty tolerant to most soils. They are an understory shrub, so they do prefer, a little bit of shade, but they can tolerate full sun. They don't like full shade very much. Smooth hydrangea is our native hydrangea. So that's Hydrangea arborescens. Unfortunately, this is a hydrangea where the soil pH does not impact the flower color. They will always bloom white unless you get a cultivar. They are the host plant of the hydrangea sphinx moth, which is a very beautiful moth. They're a really great pollinator plant. They produce a lot of nectar. They've got a lot of blooms. So they're a very good food plant. And they don't really like to have wet feet. So anywhere that's a little bit drier. Bottlebrush buckeye is the one I talked about at the very beginning. That is our aggressive shrub. It is such a good pollinator plant. When it's in full bloom, I rarely see a bottlebrush buckeye without also seeing like dozens of bees and butterflies and all kinds of pollinators just like flying around in it, having a great time. It does not behave itself. So either plant it where you don't mind if it fills all of that space, or plant it somewhere where it's not going to be fully happy. So it does not tolerate having fully dry feet at all. It does need to have water. So if you have, just keep that in mind when you're planting it. And it does like shade to partial shade. It doesn't really like full sun, but it is a really good plant. It's got these beautiful blooms. Winterberry is a really good one for winter interest. So it produces these beautiful bright red berries. You do have to have a male and a female. They are dioecious, so you do have to have both in order to get those berries. So I recommend if you're purchasing them, unless you like really trust that nursery, I recommend getting a handful of them, and then you have a better chance of having both a male and female. They prefer like full shade, partial shade. They are allegedly deer resistant. Those are notes I was seeing. We'll see. They may not be resistant to all deer. Ninebark is another really cool shrub. So this one, the leaves turn yellow in the fall, so they look really cool. They are pretty resistant to insects and disease. They're tolerant of drought. They bloom in the early summer, so May through June. They can be either 3 feet tall or 10 feet tall, depending on how happy they are and where they are. But they do like full sun to part shade. They don't like being in full shade. And then red twig dogwood, sometimes also called red osier dogwood. Another good one for red interest or for winter interest, because the actual sticks of it, the actual branches are have like a reddish hue to them. A recommendation is to like go out in the very early spring if you want it to kind of like start growing a little early, to do a little pruning in the early spring. It can be aggressive if it's in an area where it's really happy or it doesn't have a lot of competition. So just keep that in mind. But you'll get these beautiful little white happy blooms in the early spring. Getting into the more herbaceous plants, we've got milkweed. So we have both swamp milkweed and common milkweed. So Asclepias incarnata and Asclepias syriaca, both native to this region. This is like the poster child for pollinator plants. They're the host plant for the monarch butterflies. So monarch butterflies will only lay their caterpillars on milkweed. Milkweed has a toxic sap that the monarch caterpillars are immune to. They eat it and they take on that toxin themselves, so that as adults they are toxic to birds. But they are very easy to grow. They will establish very happily. And I would say if you plant it, they will come. I've seen within the first couple of years of having milkweed planted somewhere, like 5 to 10 caterpillars on one plant. So they're a really, really awesome plant to put around, and you have a couple of options as far as species. So this is the swamp milkweed. I've seen them bloom like more of an orange, and this is the common that has these bigger, thicker leaves, and they have these kind of ball-shaped pink blooms. Cardinal flower is a little bit of a shorter one. It's about 1 to 2 feet tall. These will bloom May through October, so they've got a long bloom season. They are perfectly shaped for hummingbirds. Long stem, nectar down at the very base. A lot of times you don't see cardinal flower out, just in the woods or in plantings, because unfortunately it's so pretty that people will pick the blooms. And so don't pick flowers when you're out somewhere. Leave them be, take a picture. But these guys they're really great for rain gardens. Goldenrod gets a little bit of a bad reputation. So goldenrod is not what causes your fall allergies. It blooms at the same time as ragwort, which has a very light wind-pollinated pollen, or wind-spread pollen. That is the plant that's causing your allergies, but it's not as showy. Goldenrod the pollen is not spread by wind at all. It is a very heavy pollen. It's so heavy that a lot of times you'll see the plant just kind of like, because it's being weighed down. Blooms in the fall. It can be very aggressive. So again, keep that in mind where you're planting it. And it prefers partial shade to full sun. It is a prairie plant, so think about that, kind of vibe as you're planting it. False indigo or baptisia. It is a shrub-like herbaceous plant. It's not a woody plant, it's an herbaceous plant, but it grows in the shape of a shrub. In the fall, their seed pods will dry out. They have these like almost bean-looking seed pods that will rattle, which are pretty fun. The entire plant will rattle, which I think is very fun. They prefer well-drained soil, full sun to partial shade, so pretty easy to plant. We have the purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, is our native coneflower. They generally will bloom 3 to 4 feet, or grow 3 to 4 feet tall. The genus name Echinacea actually means spiny one. So if you look closely at the stem of the plant, they have teeny tiny spines all down the stem. So I recommend wearing long sleeves if you're working with long sleeves and gloves, if you're working with them or moving them around. They'll bloom in the early summer. Their blooms will last throughout the mid-fall. There have been a couple times where I've seen them bloom twice and do 2 rounds of blooms through the season. Another one, they do prefer a little bit more moist soil. So if you have a wet area or doing a rain garden, this is a good option. And they do full sun to partial shade. Mints, if you're going to plant a mint, there are a couple of different types of mints that are native to this region. If you're going to plant a mint, make sure that you are planting it in a place that you will always be happy to have a mint there, because once they are planted, you will never get rid of them. So either plant them in a container or make sure you are very committed to having a mint plant there. But pollinators love them. Usually mint plants, I will see them almost like moving. Like the plant itself looks like it's moving because there's so many bees and other pollinators visiting. But they are pretty tolerant of soils, so you don't have to be like super specific. They do prefer to have like well-drained soil so that they're not wet all the time. And then full sun to partial shade. Wild geranium is a native ground cover that we have. They bloom in the spring. They're very short, 1.5 to 2 feet tall, and they will actually spread by rhizomes. So if you plant them and they're happy, they will send out little runners and form this little colony, all geranium there. So a very pretty little happy purple flower. Little blue stem is a grass. So if you want, more of a prairie habitat, or put some grasses around, your pond or somewhere like that. Little blue stem is a good one. We also have big blue stem. It's a winter food source for birds with these little seeds that stick around. It's really pretty in the winter time, and it tolerates a pretty wide range of soil conditions. It's not picky. They do recommend that you trim it to the ground in the late winter, so not at the beginning of the winter, because remember, those seed pods are really important as a food source for birds in the wintertime. But in the late winter, so right about, now or a couple weeks ago, trim it down to the ground to get it to stimulate that new growth for the year. Trumpet honeysuckle, Linicera sempervirens. So we have a native honeysuckle. These are written into vines now. So our native honeysuckle vine is beautiful. It's got these coral, sometimes called coral honeysuckle. Got these very beautiful blooms that are perfect for hummingbirds because they are long and thin and tubular, and they are that coral color, which hummingbirds love, those reds, oranges, pinks. They love the warm tones. They do prefer to have like well-drained soil, so they don't like to always have wet feet, and they do like full sun. But once you plant it, it will be very happy, and they are very tolerant to disturbance. And we have some that we planted 3 years ago now here at our main office, and I have to encourage it to behave itself. But it loves this spot, and it has survived a lot. Virginia creeper is a native vine. It is often mistaken for poison ivy, but just follow the length of the vine. You will see a group of 5 leaves at some point with Virginia creeper. Sometimes it'll throw out a little 3-leaf spot just to be like, haha, but you will always find 5 leaves somewhere along Virginia creeper. It's in the grape family. It does not behave itself. It is an aggressive plant, so plant it somewhere where you don't mind it taking over. It prefers full sun, but it's a really good kind of cover for something. Common hops is not historically native here, but it's considered naturalized. So it has been here enough and kind of it's made its way into being a part of the habitat. It is dioecious, so you have to have both the male and the female plant to get those seed pods. The seeds are used in growing beer, so it is hops, and it smells like it too. If you really get up to the seeds, you're like, yeah, that's what that is. It prefers full sun to partial shade, but it's pretty tolerant of different growing conditions. American bittersweet. So we have an invasive bittersweet that's Oriental bittersweet. So American has these, the easiest way to tell them apart is in the leaves. American bittersweet kind of tapers at the end of their leaves. They almost kind of curl up and have this tapered point. Oriental bittersweet leaves are rounded at the tip. In order to get the berries, you do have to have both male and female, so they are dioecious. The leaves turn yellow in the fall, and they are a little bit more picky as far as the soil type. But as far as sun, dappled to full sun, they're pretty good. So they're not as picky about amount of sun as they are with the type of soil. Trumpet vine is another really good vine that we have here. Another one that's really good for honeysuckle, or for hummingbirds, sorry. It's got those big coral leaves, tubular. It's also called devil's shoestring and hell vine because apparently, I guess sometimes it can run along the ground and people get mad when it trips them. It is also highly flammable. As a note that I was seeing when I was doing some research a little while ago. So don't plant it somewhere where you don't want fire to happen, I guess. I'm not sure what happened to give it that little note, but it was definitely a lot of people saying that. But it's pretty tolerant for most growing conditions. So you have all these plant recommendations, and there's a million more out there. Where do you get them? A lot of local organizations will do spring plant sales. Some will also do fall plant sales. So Claremont County Soil and Water Conservation District does a spring plant sale. Cincinnati Nature Center, Civic Garden Center. Deeply Rooted Landscapes, if you feel like taking a little road trip out to Athens, that is, they have a lot of a big native plant selection. Boyer Farm, which is the kind of growing location for the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, the Cincinnati Botanical Garden really. They do plant sales throughout the spring and summer, and you can just sign up online for free and then go. And it's a good spot for like woody plants, any shrubs or trees. Keystone Flora is located in Cincinnati. It's one that's kind of by appointment, but we purchased some plants from that. He actually experiments with local phenotypes. So if you want to get really nerdy about it, he works with growing plants that are like genetically from here, not just like a coneflower that is, yeah, it's a purple coneflower, but it's from Mississippi. Quail Ridge specimen trees out in Oregonia. There's White Oak Garden Center that will have some native plants, and then Natorp's Nursery in Mason. That one is also a really good one for like as a research resource. On their website, you have the ability to kind of filter plants. So you can be like, I'm looking for a native plant that likes full sun, blooms yellow, and blooms in June. And you can kind of filter through and look at that. So good kind of research resource as well. Other resources, USDA has a plant database that has a bunch of information on it. Same thing with Audubon Society Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation. Both have really good databases. They also will have some information about like different articles and kind of informational spots about native planting and planting for wildlife, things like that. Ohio Division of Natural Resources made a Backyards for Butterflies guide a few years ago, so that you can find the PDF online. If you just Google Backyards for Butterflies, it should come up, and it has a lot of good plant recommendations specifically for butterflies, and it will even divide them into like what month or what time of year they're blooming, which is really useful. And then if you're interested in taking more classes or attending some symposiums, the Cincinnati Botanical Garden and Zoo puts on some really good native plant classes and symposiums and things like that throughout the year. They also have a Plant for Pollinators challenge where you can register your garden. All you have to do, I think you have to have 2 native host plants and 2 native food plants. So 2 plants that will support the laying of eggs for pollinators, and then 2 plants that will provide food for pollinators. And you can register your garden, and if you have, for me, one of the most useful things about it is if you have neighbors who are like, what's that mess? Or why are you planting that there? Why does that look like that? You'll get the sign that you can put there, and it'll say this is a pollinator garden. And then you'll also get added to a map. So this is somewhat current map of there. As you can see, there's a garden over in Hawaii, one up in Alaska, and one over in the United Kingdom. So with that, if you have any other questions, or if you have any questions, feel free to put them in that chat or to email me afterwards. But thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn.